Hey everybody, it's Binja the Body Whisperer. Welcome to the DailyWEE. How's everybody doing? I'm on my walk for the day and had my cup of coffee, did some reading. One thing I like to do is a little bit of, and you know, I've heard this before, and I think everything was kind of at different times in my life. You were like overwhelmed. So overwhelm. What is overwhelm? It's a funny thing, I think, just from what I've experienced in my own life and how I look at that. A lot of the overwhelm that I had in my life was brought on by me not either accepting the way things were, wanting things to be different, not setting boundaries, taking on too much, not really having a clear, I don't want to say, maybe goal or vision. I mean, I've always, when I simplify things, like, I'll give you an example. When I simplify in the sense of, like, when I went to college, I always found that to be very simple because you're there to do one thing: go to class. Show up, go to class. And when I would do that, I knew what the goal was. It was like broken down for me. Okay, we have a test in 2 weeks. We have another test in mid on 8 weeks, and then we have a test in between that, and then a final. So it's like very clear and defined and simple. Like, I didn't have to make the decision of what was going to happen. It was laid out for me. So I think when I got out of school, and there was that nebulous, like, okay, what next? And I remember getting my first job and sitting there looking at the kind of not knowing what was going on, and unknown to me there was, things going on, changes within the structure of the organization where I was at that I didn't know about, so people were preoccupied with that, and I kind of, looking back on it, and at the time what it felt like is I got a little bit lost in the shuffle. But because I just didn't, I kind of come from everybody else kind of giving me these things that I'm going to work on, these goals and whatnot, as far as like going from high school to college. And so now it was like on me. And I didn't really have what would be, at the time I didn't realize it, but I didn't have a sense of trust in people. But I don't think I could have seen it as that. I think I would have probably thought I did. But now looking back on it, I didn't. I didn't have that trust. And then, but I could also feel that there was something going on. There was like a reorg like I said, in the engineering firm that I was in. So things were changing there. And that had nothing to do with me. But it affected me because I was just I didn't have any kind of direction, or probably at the time I didn't have the awareness of it, right? So as looking back on it, it was a tough time in that sense of I started to look for something to fill. Well, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? And so I ended up actually starting to look into doing I was thinking about going into law school, and thinking, okay, this will be the answer. I'll go back to school because this is something I understand. So I did the LSATs but then at the same time I started to do some acting, because it was something that had kind of presented itself in college and had rekindled something inside of me. So I ended up doing doing some acting classes. So I was doing that, and feeling kind of I don't want to say it lost in that sense of lost in the shuffle. And I think what I was manifesting as well was this feeling of that it's just me. Like I have no one. I have no one to look to. so this was manifesting it in this kind of environment, which as time went on, I realized that I did have people, and I still do actually have people from that job who are still influential in my life. And I look back on it, and I didn't see it at the time, but they were the beginnings of what would be mentors to me. Not that I've ever really had a mentor, and again, I think that's because I would never allow that. I never trusted people enough to allow that. So going back to that overwhelm of like, there's so much choice. Sometimes, and again, I think we have too much choice. And what that ends up doing is you have before you, I could do this and 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 this. What do I do? What do I do? And what I've found now is what I try to do is I've given myself what I know works for me is I give myself like 3 things, what I call buckets. And anything that kind of fits in those buckets, as long as I'm moving forward on these things that are kind of like priority to me, and one of them, one of the buckets that I acting. So that's one acting bucket. So within acting, there's a lot of different choices, but as long as I'm moving forward in something within acting all the time, I give myself a lot of leeway, as in it doesn't have to be, there's no expectation of it, right? And then another thing that I find is like, for me, is like, what are hobby, like fitness, like when I talk about this, so this Binja stuff, fitness is something that I just have been interested in for more than, 3/4 of my life, or probably just under 3/4 of my life, since I was, my sister and I we start, I don't know how old we were, really young. I remember when putting together our first little like workout, and we must have been like, okay, we're gonna jump rope, we're gonna do sit-ups, we're gonna do this, and we must have only been like 10 and 11. So yeah, at least 3/4 of my life. So that's another bucket. And then another bucket is like what I consider like things that fulfill me in a different way, like hobbies, and my van is in that group. Just little things that aren't going to necessarily bring me like any kind of like, acting could bring me is my job, and the fitness, the fitness stuff, the Binja stuff, like that's how I want to help people. And it possibly could turn into somewhat of a career. Like I've actually been, selling the program, the Binja, kind of my mindset program. It's that kind of an 8-week philosophy shift course in a way. And you just listen to the program. But then the other stuff is more of just stuff that interests me and kind of fills my well back up. And that's my van, my cat, my friendships, things like that. So as long as I continue to move forward, and that over the last couple of years, I've definitely moved forward and had more, like I've developed I was just telling this to people, that circle of people who I can kind of call on and trust has grown and is great. It's so good to have that like feeling that if something is bothering me, or if I am fearful of something, or I need a gut check, that I have this group of people that are kind of spread all over the world. So they're not necessarily right with me. They're not, I can't hug them sometimes. Sometimes, it's like I do get a chance to see them, but they're there and we can kind of discuss things. So that has definitely helped. So this is kind of, I started off talking about overwhelm, and it turned into, well, I guess that's the thing, is it keeping it simple, and keeping it, like I've found that for me, honing it down and creating that less choice has helped me to then my day just kind of feels less rushed, and I don't feel overwhelmed, and I'm not always having to run to this or that, but I still feel like I'm moving forward and enjoying my life. So this has been a longer video than I thought it was going to be. So take care, Binja the Body Whisperer out, and keep moving, people.